Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Thank you. Everybody is on mute, mostly except for our guest speaker. So thank you for joining today. We are very thrilled to have Vivane Fluck from IFRC, the Regional Coordinator for Community Engagement and Accountability in the region Asia Pacific. And we also have two of her colleagues, Ola and Dizzy, from the Indonesian Red Cross, right? And so Vivane, Ola and Dizzy will be speaking about the IFRC Feedback Starter Kit. They will explain you in more detail all the content of the starter kit. It's a very comprehensive tool to manage feedback and complaint with an organization. It's a great tool for a small organization as well, very handy. So we are looking forward to the presentation, and there will be time for a question and answer at the end of the presentation. If you wish to raise a question at the end of the presentation, make sure you unmute yourself. I believe you can do that yourself. And also to flag that this presentation is recorded because some people could not attend today, and they are very willing to hear more about the Feedback Starter Kit. And we thought it'd be great to make this presentation available to a wider audience. It might be available for a limited time. We'll see that. Yeah, just to let you know for you when you speak out. Okay, so yes, I will let Vivane start then. Vivane, please go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for giving us this platform to share the tool, and for all of you to take time out of your busy schedules to join us. I'm just sharing my screen now, and hope that you can all see the PowerPoint. Can you see it? Yeah?
Yes, thank you. Yes,
great.
All good.
Excellent, thank you so much. Okay, so today we're talking about the Feedback Starter Kit, and I will go through some of the slides rather quickly in order to keep enough time that we can still ask questions, but I'm very happy to share the whole PowerPoint with all of you so that you have all of the links and details. So I first want to talk a little bit about what do we mean by feedback mechanisms, explain to you what is the starter kit and how have we tried it out, and then I will do a little bit of a walk through our template library. And as Genevieve already said, I have two of my amazing colleagues, and there's actually a few more, I think, online from Indonesia who have helped try out the starter kit and have actually rolled it out. So they will give a bit more insight into kind of the field experience of that. So what do we mean by feedback mechanism? So it should be built on community knowledge and their input in terms of channels used and in terms of languages, etc. It collects and answers feedback through multiple channels in the languages or language of choice of the community, and it collects any kind of feedback. Another important point that I found when I first did the research for this was that it's really important to link to other organizations to refer feedback, because of course we can't do everything. It's also key that we follow up on the feedback because of course people will stop talking to us if we don't respond to what they're telling us. We also, one of the gaps was the analysis of the feedback, Because quite often organizations will, collect some sort of feedback, but it will be very informal. And that means that we don't have the overall overview over what the community is saying, and to kind of, show what are the trends, what are the gaps in our response. And finally, it should report on that feedback in order to adapt our programs. So what is collected through a feedback and complaints mechanism in the terms of this toolkit? Everything, if we do our job well. That means if people trust us enough to share things with us. So it can be positive or negative, it can be questions, comments, and even if we don't ask for sexual exploitation and abuse related feedback, if we are trusted, we will most likely come across these kind of concerns. There will be rumors, misconceptions, and at times there will also be compliments, if we're lucky. So what is the starter kit? Basically, it gives us the very basic things and tools that we need in order to set up a very simple feedback mechanism. When I first developed the starter kit, it was done with my own experience, having worked for other organizations such as Internews, and having listened to a lot of different national societies all over the world on what they need in terms of feedback, what are the gaps, what are the things that are working well already. This means that in the starter kit, you get everything from the very beginning. So how do you get management and staff buy-in and support? Because of course, feedback is not a silo activity. Everybody needs to be on board with it, because very often it's not the accountability, or we call it CEA, community engagement and accountability person, who will have the answers to the feedback. I don't know anything about latrines, so I need my WASH colleague to be on board so that they can actually address that feedback. It gives suggestions and how we can assess what kind of channels are trusted, and takes you through all the steps you need to set up a feedback mechanism. And then it goes into the kind of continuous cycle of community feedback, like how do you collect and document feedback, how do you answer feedback, analyze it, share it with colleagues and partners, adapt, and of course share answers with the community. So just a few examples of the tools that are in the starter kit. So for instance, there is a very, very simple complaint standard operating procedure. So this is for the front end. So for instance, for the info desk or feedback desk or the volunteer, giving some tips on, and reminding people to ask for consent, to listen carefully, and so on. And it basically is a little flow chart. Like, can you answer the question with your Q&A document? Yes, great. You can give the answer directly. No, what happens then? What happens if it's sensitive feedback, etc. And there's also a sample standard operating procedure that's a little bit more detailed and goes into also the kind of internal work of what happens with the feedback and complaint. We also talk about sensitive feedback. Now, I know that very often we are very strict to separate, for instance, sexual and gender-based violence, SGBV, and PSEA, prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, and other types of protection issues. Now, in terms of feedback, the key question for us was, is it urgent or not? So a breach of code of conduct is urgent. Corruption is urgent. PSEA or SEA is urgent. So the volunteer is not necessarily able to differentiate between all of these different categories if they don't have the right training. However, they should be able to identify, is this an urgent feedback that we need to follow up very quickly? or is it a regular one that needs more time? And that's why we only differentiate between, is it sensitive or not? And then there's more analysis at the back end that I will talk about in a minute. There's also advice on PSEA and sensitive feedback and how to handle it. And that only, of course, trained staff should really investigate. But as I said before, if we do build a feedback mechanism that people trust, we have experienced that very often we do come across these sensitive issues. And then, of course, volunteers or field staff who handle feedback need to know what they do so that they don't re-traumatize the person. There's an organigram in there because, as you may or may not know, feedback, even if you keep it simple, it does take quite a few people and that have to be involved. And now we come to one of the very practical templates, which is the feedback collection form, which can be very easily transferred into ODK or Kobo, or for us, some of the national societies use a paper collection and then fill it into the Excel sheet. The main focus is really on qualitative data in order to let the community set the agenda on what they want to tell us. So basically, we fill in kind of demographic data. We have a small text that is about consent, and we actually changed this text in Indonesia together with the volunteers to make sure that it's kind of the key points, but still simple enough. It has some, vulnerability data, etc. And then what you see is the bigger text box. That is the actual feedback. And that can be any kind of feedback. So it doesn't differentiate between a rumor or a concern. And we really just want the person to talk to us. Having so little boxes to tick means that there really is a moment for the person from the community and our field staff or volunteers to interact and have a little bit of a dialogue. And that's something that people have really appreciated, that it's not a survey, because we do those quite a lot as well, but that it's really an opportunity for them to speak about whatever they want. So usually we will use a question like, is there anything you want to share with us? Is there anything you think humanitarians should know? Something like that, but it's very flexible. And of course it changes depending on the context and also the language. There is a feedback receipt as well that people can use, because of course accountability is a tricky thing if it's only us making sure that we are accountable. So the feedback receipt gives at least a little bit of accountability to the person, where we can say, okay, for sensitive feedback, we can give an acknowledgement that we have received it, who has received it, and when. And the person who gives us the feedback can take that back and can then, if we don't follow up, come to us and say, hey, you told me that you would get back to me, but you haven't yet. Then this looks rather complex. This is the feedback database. And I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint for a moment, because I want to share with you the actual Excel sheet so that I can move in. So can you see the Excel?
Yes, Viviane, we can
Great.
see it very well. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I'm going to first zoom out a lot, and you can, whoops, that's maybe too much. You can see that there's quite a few columns, but if you're using ODK, you can simply copy paste a lot of the data up until all the blue and yellow fields. So those don't need to be filled in manually if you're doing mobile data collection. And I'm just gonna, this is, by the way, fake data. So don't worry, I'm not breaching any data security here by showing this to you. Basically, there's a lot of drop-down menus to make it easier to fill in. So we have first the channel, what this is received through. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit more so you can see is better. So the channel that the feedback is received through. Then we have the name of the staff or volunteer in case there's any questions about the feedback. Maybe it wasn't clear. We have the location, and that's above that you can see a row here that you can use for local language, because the English columns are fixed. Because a lot of our teams don't necessarily have information management support, but the row above still means that they can put in whatever local language they prefer to use. We have 3 different locations, and those again, so for instance, I put in an example here, could be district, sub-district, village, or camp, but that completely depends. It's all very, very adaptable. You have consent. So did the person give their consent? And it's yes, no, don't know. Why don't know? Because we also collect sometimes from social media, and that is in a public realm. So we would assume that the person gives consent, but of course we can't be sure. And so that's why we put that in there. Then we have the sex, again with a drop-down menu, and we have the age range. It's an age range because in many contexts, people don't actually know their exact age. And also it's for data protection reasons, because if we collect the exact age, a very precise location, and a name, or even not a name, but the sex and maybe a vulnerability, people will be able to identify the person. So that's another reason to use an age range. Then we have vulnerability. So for instance, a pregnant or lactating women, physical disability, etc. All of these drop-down menus, I should say, can be changed. So you can change them really easily. And then you have the actual feedback. So for instance, where can I get education support? My parents can't afford to provide learning materials. Then we have these yellow columns, and these are basically also copy-pasted, but they need to be checked by the person who's the feedback manager at the back end, because maybe the field staff or volunteer wasn't quite sure and could have put in the wrong thing. So is it sensitive or not? And then the status of the feedback. So is it open, closed, or referred? And then we ideally have the response that the feedback collector gave. And now here, the name of person giving feedback and the preferred contact details, we recommend to not collect this data unless it's really needed. So if we need to follow up with a specific individual, then we fill it in. But there's a whole part in the guide as well on data protection. So it's really important to read that part as well. There's a section for comments, and then we have the green column, which is automatic, so you don't need to do anything. It just copies the feedback to make it easier to use the other columns. Now the purple columns are only for the feedback manager to analyze the feedback that is received. So for instance, where can I get education support? That is a question. And here we have different categories of feedback. So is it a complaint, a compliment, rumor, belief, or something else? Then we have topics, because very often people don't speak in sectors or clusters. They live in the real world and they're not going to say wash, but maybe they talk about something else. In Bangladesh, for instance, at some point we received a lot of requests for umbrellas. Now, where does that fall under? We don't know. Once we saw that there were a lot of requests, we could follow up and understood that women were actually asking for these umbrellas because they were without a male family member and wanted to hide their faces more from people in the camp. So it's really important to have these topics and to base them on the feedback that is collected. And then we have the first and second sector. So is it education, wash, and very often there's more than one sector. But again, this can, you can also leave columns blank. A focal point for follow-up and a final response date. Once you put in the final date, and I'm just going to put in a random date here from last year, that's not working, from this year, then you see how long it took to respond. So 290 days, because I put like a random date there, but most likely it should be something like 2 days. And so these green columns again are automatic. Now the other thing that this Excel sheet does is that it gives you a really nice little feedback dashboard. And this is all automatic. So you don't need to do anything. You just fill in the data and clean it. And then you can see, for instance, feedback by type, how many complaints, how many questions, how many requests. And we can, for instance, I'm gonna clear all the filters right now. And we can see, first of all, on the left-hand side on the right, the total number of feedback is 22. And we have that here as well. But for instance, if we want to find out what have women said to us, we can use these filters on the left side. So we say women only, and then we see, oh, 13 out of 22 are feedback by women. And now we see actually that the feedback by type is very different. So there's more requests and there's also some compliments. We have a few more graphs here, like feedback by sector and topic. So for instance, access to aid services from cash, education, and WASH are very big. Then we have feedback by sector and location, etc. And these filters you can use as much as you want. So you can also, for instance, say what kind of vulnerabilities are here, or maybe I'm only interested in people, I know, between 50 and 59. There's one feedback right now, but you can see how this gives you a really simple overview over your data. In addition to that, there's a little bit of a README section explaining the acronyms. And then you have the same, basically a mirror of this Excel sheet. And for each column, it explains what you need to fill in. So for instance, column D to F gives the location where the feedback was received, and it gives you exactly what you need to fill in. Then you have another sheet with the drop-down menus, and basically you can just write something different here, and you can write it in any language, and then the logbook will change the drop-down menus. So it's really very, very adaptable in terms of language, in terms of how you want to use it. So I'm almost done with my part of the presentation, which is good because I don't want to run out of time. But I will now just share once more the PowerPoint. So this was the feedback database, this dashboard, and there's also a sample complaints or feedback report, which gives examples of how you can kind of analyze your data and present it in a very, very simple way. Because of course we can do this, you know, beautiful giant dashboard or other things, but sometimes what we need is just a simple one-pager to show our colleagues what the community is talking about. I'm only very briefly going to say that we're also working with the Humanitarian Data Exchange, short HDX, who are using something that is called Humanitarian Exchange Language, HXL. And they're using that to make data analysis more easy. And they haven't really worked with feedback data because our data is usually quite messy. It's not, because it's not collected in a survey. And so we've been looking for ways to quantify this qualitative data to make analysis more easier. And one of the tools that they have is quick charts, where you can upload, for instance, a Google Drive, a Google Sheet, or an Excel sheet, and then it will spit out different kind of charts that you can change as well. So you can change everything from the color to the way it's presented, etc. So this is a really useful tool, and we're working on that. I was very lucky to that IFRC wanted to pilot this, because very often we write these guidance manuals and we're not able to try them out. But the Feedback Starter Kit, we were able to try out in Indonesia and Malawi, and it meant that I could see where are the gaps together with the national societies there, who have been really a brilliant support and and really gave everything to try this out in the short time that we had. And we saw that there were additional templates that were missing. So for instance, a longer standard operating procedure, a feedback flow, a training outline for volunteers, and so on. And in addition, we adapted the collection form, the dashboard and database that you just saw, and added some lessons learned as well. Now, so to summarize, the starter kit helps with all the basic needs to set up and run a simple feedback mechanism. And of course, if there's a lot of capacity, excuse me, if there's a lot of capacity, you can build up on it. So you can build a whole feedback castle if you want to, with a big dashboard based on this. But if there's not that much capacity in terms of information management particularly, then you still have something that works. We've translated this into Arabic as well, and it's in English available too. And since we're using this tool as well in the COVID-19 response, there is a chance that at least the templates themselves will be translated as well in other languages from the Asia Pacific region. It's also adaptable to any context, which I hope I made clear through showing you the dashboard and how it can be changed, and you can build onto it. That's it for me for now. So I will hand over to Ola and Dizzy to give a short presentation of the Feedback Starter Kit.
Thank you.
And I will kind of do the slides for them. So forgive me if I'm like too short or too long.
No problem. Thank you. Over to you, Ola and Dizzy.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Ola, and I'm with my colleagues here, Desi, and we are the focal points of the community engagement and accountability from the Indonesian Red Cross. And we will try to just learn the experience on how to feedback starter kit that we together with also that we do the starter kit for our operation in Sulawesi, Lombok, and also in Natuna recently. We can get to the next slide. Yeah. So this is a little bit information about the feedback channels that the TMI are using now. We are using the face-to-face with our volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers in sub-district level. The feedback using the ODK. And also we do the sub desk to get the feedback from the community. And we work closely with the release distribution team. So whenever they do the release distribution, the CA team also open the help desk to get the feedback from the community. And also we have a hotline, like you see in the presentation. That's the number of our hotline doing our operation from the beginning and up until now. We get the telephone and SMS from the community. Whenever they want to ask something, they want to complain, they can. They usually contact our hotline. And also we use our social media, not only in the sub-district level, but we also have our feedback collect mechanism in our social media here in the headquarters based in Jakarta. So whenever people want to ask something, we ask them to the hashtag #AskTMI, and after that they can give anything that they want to know or to ask. And the last thing, we also have a radio. So we have a radio and also in Lombok. And in Sulawesi, we start our talk show radio program since the beginning of the operation and up until now. And we have a lot of feedback from the community through the talk show radio. Next slide, please. So this is what we recorded. So the information is like Vivian explained before. We have some consent. So whenever we want to interview the community, the first thing we do is to ask them the permission whether they want to get recorded and whether they want this data we use for the PMI, and also if we want to use it for other organizations. And also the important thing is the names of the beneficiaries, the contact information. Some of the people, they don't give us the contact number, but they give us the address of their home. And also we recorded also where they live in sub-district and also province. We also record the age category and also sex, whether they men or they women. And we also recorded about the vulnerable status, whether they are vulnerable or they live with the families with the vulnerable member. And also the important thing is to record the feedback, and not only if they want to ask questions, if they want to complain, or if we hear about rumors, we also collect the feedback and the response. So this is very important, because we train our volunteers how to collect the feedback and also how to respond to it. If they can respond themselves, we urge them to do it. Or if they don't have the capacity to respond, then they go back to the PMI office, and then we will have the coordination meeting to develop the feedback and then to refer again to the community. Also, the last is the volunteer's name. So whenever the logbook manager wants to ask something about the feedback, so they can, or she or can go to the volunteers who collect the feedback. Yeah, so this is the feedback flow chart. We mobilize the volunteers to obtain feedback from the communities in a number of areas. We receive feedback when they ask or gave input through the radio talk show and through face-to-face conversation between the volunteer and communities that are usually done during the health promotion or is there any facilitation. And we also receive feedback from the hotline that is operation in the morning up until afternoon, and from the social media. And some of our volunteers using the ODK, but some of them using the paper form. And all the feedback comes to or recorded in a logbook in a province. So we have a volunteers who train to do the collect or to copy paste all into the logbook that we have shown us before. Okay, so this is a logbook. It contains columns with various information such as data of feedback received, form of feedback, complaints, questions, suggestion, or rumors, and also the feedback of the community. So this is what we use in our operation in Lombok and Sulawesi, and also recently in Natuna. For the Natuna, we only collect the rumors because there is a difference between the feedback collect in Sulawesi and Palu and Lombok, and also in Natuna. Natuna, we face, it's not a disaster that we face, but it is the COVID-19 that we face, and there are no needs about like blankets or food or shelter. What they need is the information, because when we arrive at Natuna, and that's after our information cities in Wuhan, and had to observe in Natuna Island, the community, they didn't get any information at all from the local government, They just get the information from the social media that we know a lot of that information is coming from the social media. So at that time, the feedback from Natuna mostly is about the rumors. Yeah, next. Yeah, so this is the dashboard that the Vivian also mentioned before. The dashboard contains, this is the national dashboard level here in PMI. So it consists of a 3-hour operation. So we collect all the feedbacks coming from the Sulawesi, coming from Lombok, and also the rumors coming from Natuna. You can see that we analyze the feedback by age range and gender, and feedback type, and also feedback by day, and also the feedback by sector. So this is very helpful for us, to collect feedback, and also the important thing is to analyze all the feedback coming from those 3 areas. If you want to add something about this, yeah, to add, Aulia mentioned about this dashboard, it helps us to coordinate with the sector about the current situation, and also about the type of information that we get from the community. So it will help the other sector to address this issue accordingly. Yeah. Okay, next please. So this is what we analyzed within 3 months from the December 2018 to 2020. So this is the feedback by type example for the COVID-19. As you can see in Natuna, there are 23% of rumors, and that is a lot of rumors coming from Natuna. What we heard from Natuna, once they didn't get information, so they heard rumors coming from the social media that say that the coronavirus spread by the airborne, and then coronavirus spread by the waterborne. So this is there's one village like 1 kilometer from the observation location where our Indonesian citizens being checked by the Ministry of Health. At that time, when the citizens were coming, like 100 people coming from that area being evacuated by themselves because they scared, they don't know what is the coronavirus and everything. So when our team came to Natuna, we do health promotion, and also we do the clarifications of the rumors that are being by the community. Yeah, next please. Yeah, so this is the feedback by sector and location. So as you can see, this is a lot of colors. I hope you don't get confused. So within the 3 months, the most of feedback come from Sigi area in Sulawesi, because at that time they are conducting the cash-based intervention. So a lot of people were asking about how to get the money, why this area gets money and this area with money, and then how to use the money, what we can buy with that money. So a lot of questions coming from the community when we do this cash-based intervention. And also some feedback related to water sanitation. Sometimes they usually ask about the clean water distribution, how many times PMI will distribute the sanitation, how we get the hygiene kit, water tank, and also the water tank. Because some of the people mentioned that some other organizations gave them the water tank, so can they get the water tank from the PMI? So that is some of the feedback related to water and sanitation. Okay, next please. Yeah, maybe Desi want to explain. Yeah, this is the feedback by location. As earlier mentioned previously, that we're trying to consolidate our feedback collecting from the field. So it's compile the feedback from the last 3 months from the pre-operation in Sigi and Sulawesi, Lombok, and also in Natuna. So mostly we get the feedback from the Sulawesi. We receive 50 feedback from the Sulawesi, particularly in Sigi. But at the time, Sigi activity related with the case-based intervention. And earlier in February 2020, we have like feedback focus on the rumor in Natuna Island. Yeah, next please. Yeah, so this is what we mentioned before. So a lot of feedbacks coming from the community is focused on the release distribution, because they want to get really the relief, and they want to know when they can get more relief from the PMI. Okay, next. Yeah, so this is the this feedback community channel. So face-to-face is the way to get feedback from the community, and really, the volunteer mobilization is one of the effective ways. That is why we train our volunteers about the CA and how to collect the feedback and how to do the feedback mechanism. And at this time, we still lack of volunteers. We still need more volunteers to do the feedback. Now we have an operation, actually not only in Sulawesi and also in Lombok, but we are preparing now to do the CA and also the risk communication for the COVID-19 here in 8 areas in Indonesia that is vulnerable with the COVID-19. So this is our challenge. But because of we have like 1 million volunteers, so we will going to to continue with this feedback communication channel by face-to-face because we really depend on our volunteers to get the feedback from community. Okay, I think that's it, Vivian.
Okay, thank you very much, Ola and Dizzy, and thank you, Viviane. I think this was a very comprehensive presentation. I had a number of questions that came to my mind, and then you managed to answer them somehow later in the presentation. But yeah, it's good that we take this time for questions, because I'm sure there are a few here, and we already have a first one. That is on the chat box, and the question is, what are the major activities that you are conducting in communities before implementing Feedback Starter Kit? So I suggest we start with this question, and as other people have questions, then oh yeah, there are a few here. So yeah, okay, let's start with this question and then we'll take the next one.
So just to clarify, is the question what activities we do to prepare for collecting feedback, or what activities we do in general?
I understand it as to prepare the feedback mechanism. So maybe we can start on this assumption, and then if the person had another idea, maybe he or she can clarify.
Great, yeah. So I'll just very quickly say, from the starter kit perspective, ideally we start with first conducting an assessment to really know what kind of what are trusted channels, what is literacy rate, how do people prefer to give feedback and receive answers to that feedback, so that we can really build a feedback mechanism that is built on community priorities rather than our own. Because too often we see that lots of feedback boxes are put in because that's kind of a way that we're very comfortable with, but that's maybe not the best way for every community. And so that is one of the key steps. Another is to then, of course, promote that channel and say, you know, if it's an info desk, from when to when is it open? How can you get there? And kind of, you know, just letting people know what is available and when. And to then regularly also check in, is this still working? I know that, for instance, in Indonesia as well, there was a shift in Lombok from, you know, how people prefer to share their feedback. And that means we can't just build one feedback channel and stay with that. Ideally, we always have multiple channels, but we also assess them and see, okay, so that's why the chart that shows how we collect feedback is of course useful, because if we see, oh, we're not getting anything through that channel, maybe we need to revise that. So those are kind of some of the key points, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Viviane. Your Indonesian colleagues, Ola and Dizzy, do you want to add anything?
Let me share about what we experienced in Natuna. So before we ask the community about the information, we do the rapid assessment. So we went to the communities in 3 villages, asked them what the information that do you want to know about the COVID-19, and also what is the channels for you to, if you want to share, or if you want to complain, or if you want to ask something. And then we also ask them what channel that they use to get the information. And also we also ask about who is the prominent people, who is the people they trust or they heard. You know, this is very important for us before we collecting feedback. That's what we did in Natuna. And also, before we have this feedback starter kit, we also use a very limited tools, like we collect the feedbacks from the community by WhatsApp message. So we create questions just like in a logbook, but we create it on the WhatsApp. And also before the feedback starter kit, we also use form. So it is very, you know, it's very difficult for us to get information, note the feedback from the community.
Okay, thank you. So I'm mindful of time. We have 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure all questions get an answer. Then we have a comment. I think it's more a comment than a question. In DRC, we are covering livelihood protection, emergency, and mine action. So if there's a question behind, can you please clarify? And then the next question is, how centralized decision-making is ensured based on the community feedback, in particularly related to programs like multi-year resilience building project focused on community health and education? That's a long question. What do you mean by how centralized decision-making is?
I understand it as maybe a headquarter decision-making, perhaps. Ola, do you want to answer that? Because you have the kind of the national dashboard that you're using, of course, from where you see feedback from the, you know, localized responses. Are you using that as well to influence kind of longer term programs?
Yes, actually, this is Daisy. Yeah, actually, we use the dashboard to inform our colleagues in national headquarters about the current situation and current condition in both operation. So we try to ensure that all the activities will be conducted in the field, is addressing accordingly. For the example, like previously we had a problem in Lombok related with the case-based intervention, because we receive a lot of complaints when PMI will do disbursement, tax disbursement, and the others, but we don't know about the current situation from the CDI team. So at the time, we had a meeting with the team about the current situation and try to communicate this feedback to the community. Do you want to add something? No.
Okay, thank you. Then we have, how have you developed child-friendly feedback mechanism, or is there any particular child-friendly channels, for instance?
That's a really good question. So in the Feedback Starter Kit, we don't have yet addressed child-friendly feedback mechanisms, and that's definitely a gap, I would say. I think there's, in theory, you can use it with anything because it's not a survey. So it's about documenting, if we want to simplify it, right? It's a tool that documents what people are saying to us. And that could be anybody. But of course, there's other challenges that are relevant in terms of children, such as how do you get informed consent from a child? Can you get that from the parent? Is that really consent? What are ways to make children comfortable, etc.? And I think that's like a whole separate cluster of things that we need to think about. But I think if there would be like a children's expert, they could probably adapt the toolkit to use it also with children. But there's no specific reference to it. So that's definitely something that would be interesting to work on, and also see, we're very keen to work with partner organizations. And so if there is somebody who would want to try it out, you'd be very welcome, and we'd be very willing to support as well and see how we can work together on that. Because you might have noticed that even though the PowerPoint is branded, the tools are not. And so they're really welcome for everybody to use.
Okay, thank you, Viviane. Then the next question is, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of the feedback mechanism in a certain country, region, or locality, other than the number of days that it takes to respond? So what evaluation mechanism for the actual feedback mechanism do you have?
So what we say in the starter kit is that, of course, we need to evaluate on a regular basis how does the feedback mechanism work, and we can use different tools to do that, be it focus group discussions or surveys, just like we do with other program activities. And of course, the feedback itself gives us indicators. So if we see that people are not talking to us, then we're clearly doing something wrong. Perhaps it's the wrong channel, perhaps we're not answering quickly enough, etc. Of course, the other thing is the column that says what kind of answers are given. So the volunteers or feedback collectors fill that out, and so we can evaluate also what is the quality of the answer. So there are some other indicators next to the time of response, because that is also very different, of course, right? Some things we must answer very quickly, but it's also hard to find answers for some questions. So there will always, there's always kind of an average that we get. And an average is, of course, only gives us so much information. Ola, do you have any addition on how you evaluate any of the feedback mechanisms, for instance, in Palu, like how well it works, or in Lombok?
That's since she was on PMER. Yeah, I mean, like, in the first time during we used the ODK and also the paper form and the other, we have a challenges how to consolidate all this information, and then the way of the volunteer asking the community about it is also various. I mean, like we can see the logbook that we have, like the type of information and the way that they respond, because it should be recorded into the logbook as well. So we can see from that part also. But yes, I do agree with Vivian that we need to have like FGD or a survey with the community, asking that they really know about the feedback mechanism that we have, and how they feel about this feedback channel and the others. But still working on it, because this is also one how to ensure that the communication channel and also the feedback channel that we use are effective, and it has impact to our program.
Mm-hmm. And I think I heard of some national societies also including a question in, for instance, exit surveys after distribution, asking if people are aware of the feedback mechanism. And of course, you can ask different questions as well, like how much do you feel that is your feedback responded? Have you given feedback? Did you get a response, etc.? So there's different ways to track the effectiveness of a feedback mechanism.
We did also this intervention and relief distribution, but mostly with that sector. But we don't know really, we don't have any information about it, because I mean, like not all sectors do the exit survey, but there is like a few activities related, like monitoring and evaluation, and also review conducted by the each sector, that maybe we need to include the CA component or CA related with effectiveness to that their goals, like monitoring and evaluation.
We had, yeah, thank you so much, Ola. Also to say, maybe because I can see Anne Clement is saying we'll be happy to work on this with you. We had also a presentation recently by Plan International on a child-friendly feedback mechanism. So maybe some opportunities for us to put people in touch and see it as something that can be done together. I also have, we have 1 minute left, but I was very curious, how long does it take to have the system up to speed once you start, once you decided to implement it?
I think it really depends on the context as well. Yeah. So how we use the tool, right? So in some contexts, we may set up very quickly, like in an emergency context, and it's not a long-term feedback mechanism, unfortunately, I'd say. Like I usually advise that we build feedback mechanisms in times that are not an emergency, so that if there is an emergency, people know where to go and trust us, because really this is very much about trust, and we have to prove ourselves that we go back to the community and we answer those questions and things happen based on the feedback. That's how we can, get people to give feedback. But I mean, but perhaps, Ola, like, do you want to give an example? How long did it take in, let's say, Sulawesi to actually implement and run a feedback mechanism that's functioning?
With the feedback starter kit, or with the paper form, with the old traditional one?
Let's say with the feedback starter kit.
Wow, I think it's a lot of journey for the feedback starter kit. I mean, like, we start from the paper base with trial during the Mount Agung eruption operation, and then in Bali, and then we're trying to use it in Lombok and also Palu. And because some people, some people ask us to use like ODK and Pepper and the others. So it's quite difficult at the time to have like consolidate information both from the paper base and also from the ODK base. So I mean like it takes more than 3 months to just the information from the WhatsApp and also other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It really depends on, you know, how big a team do you have, how much have they done before. Like I remember working in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and the volunteers were from the camp and had never, like some of them had never used a laptop before. And so we invested a lot of time into training them to use mobile data collection. And I think that took maybe a month and a half or something like that.
Okay.
And in the end, they were all very comfortable in using it. But then, of course, it depends, you know, do they only do this or do they also do other things? So how often in the week do they get to practice? How much mentoring do they get? And then we have other contexts where, you know, we have somebody who's very mobile savvy already. And of course, you can also use paper-based forms, but then it will take longer to transfer the data into the Excel. So I do think that the time frame of saying like between 2 or 3 months to really have it running smoothly is quite realistic. Again, it really depends on how many people you have and where it is, because some places, for instance, Myanmar, are incredibly difficult to set up feedback mechanisms because there's so many different barriers in terms of access. There's a lot of different languages. There's an aspect that people are not comfortable to give negative feedback, and there it really takes also time to build trust. And so yeah, it's very much dependent on context. That's
Thank you. Yeah.
Because we already have the feedback starter kit, it's really helpful for us to have the consolidated information and to decide what kind of information that we want to collect. So it's really helpful, especially from Indonesia perspective, because yeah, that's our challenges seriously consolidate all those information that we find the answer now.
Okay, thank you. I would have a lot more questions, and I'm sure some of the people online have too, but we have to end the meeting. One last thing, Viviane, where can we find all the material? Do we need to contact you to receive the pack? Is it available online?
It's available online. So if you Google IFRC Feedback Starter Kit, but I will also just quickly stop sharing my screen and try to post the link into the chat box. And you can download it. We call it Tool 15 because it's part of a whole community engagement and accountability toolkit. And here is the link. Yeah, and it has everything in is in Word format, so you can really adapt it. As I said already, you're very welcome to use it. I'd love to hear if you're using it, just so that we also understand how people adapted. Like I heard the other day that one organization decided to use it as their standard in one of the regions they're working in, and I actually found out about it by accident, which is totally fine. But it's just so nice to see that it's working for other people as well, and I think we can really benefit from your learning as well. So I also just saw that somebody said that they would be interested to use it in Colombia and to translate it. That would be amazing, because we also, of course, work in the LAC region, and it would be great to have those translations into Spanish. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, and if you have a French one, do let me know, because I also see opportunities to share.
I will double check. We might actually have a French version soon, but I will check. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Viviane, Dizzy, and Ola. We very much appreciate having your presentation. Again, I think it's a really good tool. I've seen your presentation a year ago at the Humanitarian Partnership and Network Week in Geneva. And I'm glad to see the progress since, and it would be really interesting to hear if non-Red Cross and Red Crescent societies have been able to use it and adapt it to their own institutional context. So definitely some ongoing discussion here. Thank you everybody for joining, and thank you again for presenters. Do let us know if you have any question after, or feel free to contact Vivane directly. Thank you, and we wish you a very good day. I wish you a very good day. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.